She stumbled into his barn with the storm barefoot and had secrets in her eyes. By sunrise, 100 warriors had come for her. Why would they surround a rancher's home? And what truth had he unknowingly invited in? The wind howled like a ghost clawing at the walls, and the rain came down so hard it sounded like bullets hitting the tin roof. Lightning tore through the sky, painting the high desert ranch in stark white flashes. Inside the barn, Thatcher Vance moved with quiet urgency, checking the horses and fastening the gates. At 51, he had the weathered face of a man who'd seen more wars than weddings. His calloused hands moved with the instinct of someone used to handling fear, with a rope, a rifle, or his bare fists. Thatcher wasn't expecting company. So when his lantern's light fell on a crumpled figure in the far stall, half buried in wet hay, mud smeared across her cheek, and limbs shaking from the cold, he froze. A woman, young, barefoot, half conscious, and out cold. He didn't waste time asking questions. Dropping to his knees, he checked her pulse. Faint but steady. Her clothes were soaked, torn, and carried patterns he didn't recognize. Woven beads, ochre-colored thread, symbols that looked older than the country itself. As thunder cracked overhead, she stirred. Her lips trembled, trying to form words. "Shh," Thatcher murmured, lifting her gently into his arms. She was light, too light. "Let's get you warm." Inside the ranch house, the fire was still burning from earlier. He laid her on the couch, wrapped her in an old wool blanket, and stoked the flames higher. His old dog, Bristle, growled low but didn't bark, just circled and lay by the door, alert and uneasy. Thatcher knelt beside the woman, brushing wet hair from her forehead. Her skin burned with fever. Eyes fluttered open, barely, and locked onto his for half a second. Then she whispered one word, "Warn them," and went still again. Thatcher blinked. "Warn who?" No answer, just the hiss of rain against the windows. He moved fast, boiling water, grinding herbs, crushing antibiotics he kept for wounded animals. As he spooned the bitter mixture into her mouth, she gagged, but swallowed. He sat beside her, arms crossed, heart pounding. What the hell had just walked into his barn? The storm raged on, shaking the walls. But inside the house, it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes before something breaks loose. He glanced at her again, the sharp cheekbones, the braid unraveling over her shoulder, the carved pendant still clutched in her hand. It wasn't just the way she looked. It was the feeling she brought with her, like a wind that had traveled miles through sacred ground. Bristle growled again, low and rumbling. Thatcher stood and crossed to the window. At first, he thought the shadows were playing tricks, but then he saw them. Dozens of figures standing just beyond the tree line, motionless, watching, and more, stepping silently from the hills, flanking the barn. Thatcher's breath caught. There were at least 100 of them, warriors, and they had surrounded the ranch. If you thought this was intense, wait until you see who surrounds the ranch in the morning. Thatcher didn't move from the window for nearly a minute. The rain had slowed, but the ground was thick with mist, and rising out of it were forms, some on horseback, others standing still as trees. Not a sound came from them. No shouting, no gunshots. Just the silent presence of warriors cloaked in shadow, their long hair wet from the storm, spears and rifles glinting faintly under the gray dawn light. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't an ambush. It was a message. He turned sharply as Bristle barked once, then trotted back toward the woman, who was now sitting upright on the couch, breathing hard and clutching the blanket to her chest. Her eyes were wide, bright and alive with a fear that hadn't left her since the storm. "They're here," she said, voice raspy. Thatcher crossed the room. "You know them?" She nodded slowly. "They followed me. But not to kill. I'm gonna need more than that." She looked up at him, her face still pale but more alert now. "My name is Sani, daughter of Chief Tasa Greyhawk of the Southern Band." Her words came clipped, formal. "I was taken by men from the other side, soldiers pretending to be ranchers. I escaped. Barely." Thatcher leaned on the mantel, watching her. "Why my barn?" She hesitated. "I didn't choose it. The storm pushed me here. But maybe it wasn't by accident." A long pause. Then Sani looked toward the window, her voice trembling. They think you took me, that you're holding me. Well, Thatcher muttered, this just gets better by the minute. Before he could say more, a distant call echoed through the trees, a single mournful cry, answered by a chorus of low drum beats. They're calling the chief forward, Sani whispered. You need to let me speak to him. If he thinks I'm your prisoner. The front door shook under a heavy knock. Bristle growled again, this time more fiercely. Thatcher walked calmly to the entry and opened it with one hand on the latch of the rifle leaned by the door. Standing just 10 feet beyond the porch was a man who looked carved from stone, tall, draped in wet deerskin and bone ornaments, with eyes like tempered steel. He said nothing. Behind him, rows of warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a semicircle around the ranch. Thatcher stepped outside, unarmed, rain still dripping from the eaves above. He spoke first. She's inside, alive. I didn't harm her, didn't even know who she was till an hour ago. Chief Greyhawk didn't move. His eyes searched Thatcher's, judging the truth between heartbeats. Then, without looking back, he raised his hand. The warriors parted. Sani appeared in the doorway, a blanket still around her shoulders. Father, she said softly, he saved me. The chief finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. Then he is not our enemy. But his gaze lingered on Thatcher, unreadable. Not yet. Then he added something else, words that made the hair on Thatcher's neck rise. Now that you've taken her in, you are part of this war. And just like that, everything changed. The early morning haze clung to the fields as the sun crawled above the rim of Coyote Hollow. The storm had passed, but its tension lingered like a weight in the air. Thatcher stood on his porch, arms crossed, as Chief Taza Greyhawk and his warriors remained stationed in a wide circle around the ranch, watchful, silent, and unmoving. Sani sat by the fire inside, sipping broth from a tin cup. Her fever had broken, but her expression was tight, her posture alert. She knew this wasn't over. They won't leave, she said without looking at him. Not until my father understands why I was here, and why you're still alive. He got the part where I didn't kill you, Thatcher muttered, glancing back at the door. What else does he need? A signed affidavit? Sani didn't smile. He needs to know your heart. The man who shelters a stranger in the middle of a storm is either a fool or something else. Thatcher huffed. Maybe both. He stepped outside again. The warriors hadn't flinched since they arrived, each one armed, faces painted with ceremonial ash. But their weapons remained sheathed. This wasn't a raid. It was a test of trust, or perhaps of allegiance. A few minutes later, Chief Greyhawk returned, walking alone toward the porch. Sani followed silently and stood beside Thatcher. The chief studied him in the growing light, his weathered face unreadable. She was taken near the holy springs, the chief said, voice low and even. A sacred place desecrated by men who wear stolen uniforms and carry stolen flags. We tracked them, but they vanished like smoke. She was gone for 6 nights. We buried a false grave. Sani lowered her head. Greyhawk looked at Thatcher with eyes that missed nothing. You are not one of them. Your walls are old. Your hands smell of earth, not blood. But that does not mean you are our friend. Thatcher met the stare without flinching. I don't want to be your enemy, and I didn't ask to be in your war. Greyhawk stepped closer. No one ever asks. War comes whether you're ready or not. Ask the wind if it meant to carry fire. The words hit Thatcher harder than he expected. The chief turned to leave but stopped short. There will be a council at sundown. If you wish to understand what she carries, what she's fled from, you'll be there. Then to Sani, he said, your return means something. To some it is hope, to others a threat. He walked back into the mist without waiting for a reply. Sani stared out toward the hills. They think I died carrying the prophecy. Some want it buried. Others want it fulfilled. Thatcher narrowed his eyes. And what about you? She didn't answer. Just clutched the carved pendant around her neck and whispered something in a language older than the ranch itself. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about survival. It was about something much older and much bigger. The sun dipped low behind the mesas, casting the land in copper and shadow. Smoke rose from the fire circle built at the edge of Thatcher's pasture. surrounded by warriors, elders, and scouts who had returned from the hills. They sat in silence, save for the rustle of the wind and the crackling of firewood. This wasn't a meeting. It was a reckoning. Thatcher stood near the back, arms folded, hat pulled low, doing what he did best, watching. Chief Greyhawk raised his hand. The daughter of the wind returns, carrying words that were nearly lost. Let her speak. Sanny stepped forward, slow but steady. Her voice was calm, but something burned behind her eyes. They sent me to deliver a warning to the other bands, she began. But I never made it. I was betrayed before I crossed the dry river. Men in uniforms, but not soldiers. Government men, but not the government. They took me to a compound, hidden in the rocks near the East Pass. The warriors stirred at the mention. Several glanced at each other. No one had found that place before. They're part of a syndicate, Sanny continued, a private company buying land along the border. They don't care about laws or treaties. They want our ancestral grounds, and they plan to seize them under the cover of darkness, using forged deeds and firepower. A murmur spread through the group like dry grass catching flame. Thatcher's jaw tightened. Chief Greyhawk's expression didn't change, but his voice lowered. And what of the prophecy? Sanny unwrapped the pendant from her neck, a carved spiral etched with symbols too old to be taught. She held it in both hands and recited words in a tongue Thatcher couldn't understand. Her voice took on a rhythm like thunder behind distant hills. Then she translated, when the storm child crosses the dusted plain and falls into the arms of the exile, the land will be tested. A fire will rise in the east, and only those who have walked both blood and silence will hold the line. A hush fell over the circle. Greyhawk turned toward Thatcher. You are the exile. Thatcher stiffened. I don't believe in prophecy. Belief is not required, the chief replied. Only presence. One of the younger warriors scoffed from the shadows. We put our fate in a white rancher now. Greyhawk silenced him with a glare. We put our fate in the words our ancestors left behind. Sonny looked at Thatcher. I didn't know it would lead me here. I only know I wasn't meant to die. Later, as the fire burned lower and the warriors dispersed, Thatcher stood with Bristle by the corral. The horses were uneasy. You're not wrong to be spooked, he muttered. Sonny approached quietly. You think I'm crazy? I think you're scared, which tells me you might be telling the truth. She studied him for a moment. Will you stand with us? Thatcher looked out into the darkness. Somewhere beyond the hills, men with fake deeds and real guns were preparing to erase something sacred. I'll stand, he said. But I don't follow visions. I follow the tracks. She didn't smile, but she nodded. It was enough. The next morning, the desert was still. Thatcher stood by the water trough, staring down at his reflection. His own eyes looked back at him, tired, skeptical, and no longer able to pretend the world wasn't shifting under his boots. Behind him, Sanny was speaking quietly with her father, hands moving in sharp gestures. The conversation looked tense, though their voices were low enough not to carry. Bristle padded up beside him, ears twitching toward the hills. Thatcher followed the dog's gaze. He'd felt it too. They weren't alone out here. By mid-morning, the council had broken apart. Some warriors returned to their posts, others disappeared into the wilderness, relaying messages to allied bands. But Thatcher stayed behind. Something in the air had started to tighten, like a string pulled taut. Sanny found him near the barn. You served in the war, didn't you? She asked. He didn't look up. Everyone my age did. I mean you served and survived something that should have killed you. Thatcher let out a short laugh. More than once. Then maybe you'll understand this. She sat on the edge of a wooden barrel. When I escaped that compound, I heard them talking, laughing. They don't see us as people, just dust in the way of progress. Thatcher said nothing. They're coming, she added, and they won't wait for permits. They'll bring trucks and guns and drones. They've done it before. Arizona, New Mexico, burned everything that stood in their way. You really think they'll hit a ranch in the middle of nowhere? Sanny turned toward him, eyes sharp. You're not just a ranch, Thatcher. Your land sits on a convergence point. 3 tribal territories, a water source, and access to the northern ridge. If they take this ground, they control the passage to half the basin. He swore under his breath, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his past begin to stretch its legs. Later that evening, he climbed into the attic of his house. Bristle followed, tail wagging but cautious. At the back of the dusty space, Thatcher reached beneath a floorboard and pulled out a worn oilskin wrap. Inside, a Navy Colt revolver, a battered field journal, and a silver medal from a campaign that had killed better men than him. The Vulture, he muttered. It was a name he hadn't heard in years. Not since he rode with the Union Scouts in 1863. Not since the ambush at Black Creek, the one that left him half dead and 3 of his men buried in shallow graves. He'd been good at what he did. Too good. He left that life behind with blood on his hands and a bullet still lodged near his spine. But now a storm was circling again, and whether he liked it or not, the wind had brought him a message. Thatcher strapped the revolver to his side and descended the ladder. Outside, warriors were lighting torches around the perimeter, chanting low, rhythmic prayers. Sandy looked up as he emerged from the house, her eyes locked on the weapon. "I guess you're in now." "I was in the moment you collapsed in my barn," Thatcher said. "Now I just want to make sure you're not the first of many." She didn't speak, but her hand found his shoulder, and the old warhorse inside him began to stir. The scent hit him first, faint but wrong. Thatcher lifted his head, eyes narrowing at the horizon. The breeze had shifted. What was once crisp desert air now carried the unmistakable stench of burned wood. And something worse. He mounted up before anyone else noticed. From the bluff above the canyon, Thatcher scanned the valley below through a battered spyglass. To the east, smoke rose in lazy black spirals from what had once been an Apache outpost. The lookout tower, nothing more than a skeletal frame of logs, was engulfed. Ash floated upward like a warning whispered to the sky. He spurred his horse down the ridge without a word, Bristle running ahead like he already knew the path. By the time he reached the clearing, the fire had cooled to smoldering embers. 3 bodies lay in the brush. Not killed in battle, executed. One of them, a young scout named Koa, had his hands bound behind his back. Another was face down, blood soaking into the dirt. Thatcher dismounted and knelt beside the largest one. Arrows had been snapped off and reinserted, made to look like tribal weapons. But the shaft wood was synthetic. The feathers? Too clean. Too precise. He pulled one free and turned it slowly in the sunlight. "Military grade," he muttered. Behind him, Sani and a small party of warriors approached at a gallop. Her eyes widened at the scene, and she dismounted before her horse fully stopped. "Koa," she whispered, voice cracking. Thatcher handed her the arrow. "They're trying to make it look like a rival tribe did this." Sani turned the arrow in her hands, her jaw tightening. "Divide us. Make us fight each other. Old tactics." "It's working," said a voice from the group. It was Nakai, a proud young warrior with a scowl permanently carved into his face. 3 elders already believed this was done by the Painted Mesa clan. They're calling for vengeance. Sani spun toward him. "It wasn't the Mesa. These weapons are—" "They'll believe what they want to believe," Nakai snapped. "They won't follow a prophecy. They barely follow my father anymore." The air grew colder around them. Thatcher stepped in. "You said they're gathering at Painted Mesa?" Nakai nodded. "Tonight. If a messenger doesn't get there soon, war will break out." Sani turned to her father's scout. "Right ahead. Show them the arrow." Thatcher knelt by the ashes again and spotted something else. Tracks deep and disciplined. He followed them 20 feet toward the tree line before stopping. Boot prints. Large, uniform. Perfectly spaced. "Mercs," he said aloud. "Trained ones." He picked up a small object embedded in the soil, a plastic tag no bigger than a coin. When he turned it over, a company logo gleamed beneath a layer of grime. A wolf's head bleeding from the eyes. Sani's face went pale. "Lobo Holdings. That's them. That's the syndicate." Thatcher dropped the tag like it burned. "They just made this war official." The council fire crackled louder than usual that night, though no one spoke above a whisper. A cold tension threaded through the gathered warriors. The burning of the outpost had shaken them, and now lines were being drawn, some along blood, others along belief. Chief Greyhawk stood with arms folded, his weathered face lit by firelight. He listened, silent, as 2 elders argued over whether to retaliate against the Painted Mesa tribe. Sani watched from just behind her father, fists clenched at her sides. "This is exactly what they want," she finally said, her voice cutting through the din. "You're about to do their work for them." "The arrows were found in Koa's chest," Elder Tolan snapped. "Mesa style." "Imitated," Sani corrected. "Modern materials. Same design, but wrong weight, wrong balance." "She speaks the truth," Thatcher added, stepping forward, holding out the retrieved shaft. "These were factory-made, mass-produced, probably 20 more just like it in a crate, somewhere with a barcode." Tolan looked him over with contempt. "And why should we trust the word of a white man who's barely said 2 words in 20 years? Before Thatcher could reply, a low voice broke the tension. "Because he's not lying." All heads turned toward Nakai, the same young warrior who had been stirring doubt earlier. His arms were crossed now, but his eyes were alert, calculating. "You have something to say, son?" Chief Greyhawk asked cautiously. "I followed the tracks myself," Nakai said. "They were made from combat boots, not moccasins, not painted mesa." Some murmured approval, others squinted, skeptical. Sani tilted her head. "Since when do you verify my story, Nakai?" He gave her a tight smile. "When it benefits me." But something was off. Thatcher watched Nakai closely, the subtle twitch in his jaw, the way he shifted his weight slightly away from the firelight, like he didn't want something seen. Thatcher narrowed his eyes. "You were the first one to name Painted Mesa, before any elders did. Why?" Nakai turned slowly. "What are you accusing me of, Rancher?" Thatcher took a slow step forward. "Nothing yet." Then he reached into his coat pocket and tossed something into the fire. It flared, not from wood but from metal. A small palm-sized device sparked and hissed before melting into the coals. A tracker. Gasps erupted around the circle. Thatcher looked around. "That was hidden under my horse's saddle blanket. Found it half an hour ago." Chief Greyhawk's eyes burned into Nakai. "How did it get there?" Nakai sneered. "Ask your outsider. Maybe he planted it himself." "Except I checked it for fingerprints," Thatcher said, "and a man named Ramirez at the BLM office ran it for me over the airwaves." He drew out a folded paper, an email transcript. "It was registered to a man named Nakai Tasa, used 2 days ago to ping coordinates to a satellite-linked server." The circle fell silent. Chief Greyhawk's voice came low and lethal. "You betrayed your own." Nakai's face twisted. Then he spun and ran. 2 warriors leapt after him, but Nakai knew the terrain too well. Within seconds, he vanished into the night. Gone. But not before sending someone a message. Sani stared into the darkness. "They know where we are now." Thatcher clenched his fists. "Then we've got less time than we thought." By dawn, the ranch had transformed from a peaceful homestead into a war camp. Thatcher moved with deliberate speed, barking instructions like a sergeant back in the saddle. The Apache warriors followed without protest. There was no more room for doubt. The betrayal by Nakai confirmed what they all feared. The enemy was coming, and they wouldn't be coming in small numbers. The fences were reinforced first, not just with extra boards but with barbed wire, angled inward, designed to slow trucks and funnel attackers toward narrow choke points. Wooden posts were converted into pikes. Hidden trenches were dug under the cover of brush, rigged with oil-soaked spikes. "We don't beat them with force," Thatcher said, driving a shovel deep into dry earth. "We beat them with time." Sani was everywhere, helping lay tripwires, packing ammo, marking locations with colored stones. Despite the fever that nearly killed her 2 days ago, she moved like lightning. Her pendant now hung outside her shirt, glowing faintly in the desert light. In the main barn, they converted feed stalls into supply caches. Rifles, bows, even an old Gatling gun hauled out from Thatcher's attic and restored by a mechanic from the tribal village. "I thought you said this thing was illegal," Sani asked, brushing dust from the barrel. Thatcher grinned. "So is land theft and murder. Let's call it even." Bristle barked as new riders arrived, scouts returning from nearby territories. They brought news both good and bad. More tribes were considering joining the defense, but many still feared open war. Rumors of mercenary convoys heading toward the region had begun spreading fast. Inside the house, Thatcher pinned a hand-drawn map to the wall. On it, he marked every known movement of Lobo Holdings' men, where they'd built false ranches, bribed officials, or dug exploratory wells on stolen land. Their strategy was clear: surround, isolate, consume. They'll hit us like they've hit everyone else, he told Greyhawk, but we're not everyone else. We are a circle, the chief replied. They do not understand the strength of circles. Outside, the wind picked up, and with it came the smell of dust and oil. Sandy paused near the corral, breathing it in. They're close, she whispered. Too close, Thatcher muttered. We need to get the women and the wounded out of here. They won't leave, Asani said. They all believe this is the line. That evening, Thatcher climbed to the ridge alone, spyglass in hand. What he saw made his blood turn cold. 4 black trucks, 2 drones circling in lazy loops, and on a far rise, a man in a white shirt holding binoculars, watching, marking. He returned to the ranch, face grim. They've spotted the defenses, he told the others. They know we're preparing. Will it stop them? Greyhawk asked. Thatcher shook his head. Number, it'll make them come faster. Around the fire that night, the warriors didn't chant. They sharpened blades, checked arrows, loaded magazines. Because this wasn't about prophecy anymore. It was a war, and it was coming soon. They came with the morning wind, loud engines, thick tires tearing through the desert scrub, headlights blazing like false suns. Dust plumed behind them in long, curling tails. 4 trucks in front, more behind. At least 20 mercenaries, armed and armored, riding toward the ranch like wolves toward a wounded deer. But the deer had teeth. Thatcher stood at the gate, revolver holstered, rifle in hand. He wasn't alone. Chief Greyhawk and his warriors flanked the trenches, hidden beneath canvas and brush. Bows strung tight, rifles loaded. Their war paint gleamed like obsidian. Sowney stood on the barn's roof with a long spyglass and a signaling flag made of old white cotton. Her pendant caught the rising sun, pulsing like a heartbeat. They were ready. The first bullet didn't come from the enemy. It came from Thatcher. He fired a warning shot into the dirt 20 yards ahead of the lead truck. The convoy halted instantly. The mercs fanned out, exiting their vehicles with the precision of trained killers. One stepped forward, tall, clean-shaven, Oakley shades and a smug mouth. You got no legal right to this land, he called out. We've got documentation, federal contracts. Then show 'em to the fence and get the hell out, Thatcher replied. Last warning. The man smirked and raised a fist. The siege began. Gunfire erupted. Dust exploded from the fence posts as bullets slammed into the barricades. Arrows flew like wasps, silent but deadly. One struck a merc in the thigh. Another caught a man in the neck, dropping him before he could scream. Thatcher ducked behind cover, squeezing off precise shots. 2 mercs down, 1 vehicle disabled by a flaming pitch jar hurled from the barn's loft. They're circling left, Sandy shouted from above. Let them, Thatcher growled, because he'd planned for that. As the mercs tried to flank the ranch, they hit the trench traps, spike pits and false ground. Screams echoed through the canyon as 3 men disappeared into the earth. From behind the house, more warriors emerged, pushing the enemy back with a combination of ancient tactics and modern tools. Smoke bombs filled the air, followed by thunderous yells in native tongues. The barn caught fire, on purpose. Sandy had prepared it, stuffed it with hay, kerosene, and flash paper. The blaze roared skyward like a signal to the heavens. In the chaos, Sandy was hit, grazed across the side by a ricochet. She cried out and dropped behind a rain barrel, blood soaking her shirt. Thatcher saw it and ran, weaving through gunfire, dragging her into the house. You're all right, he said, pressing cloth to her side. Don't lie to me, she muttered. He smiled grimly. Fine, you'll probably be all right. Outside, the battle turned. Chief Greyhawk led a charge from the eastern ridge, warriors on horseback, faces masked in ash, riding like ghosts out of history. The mercs faltered. Their lines broke. And at the center of it all, Thatcher Vance stood tall in the dirt, eyes steady, smoke curling from his rifle barrel. The ranch was held, but the war wasn't over, not yet. The smoke from the barn still hung in the air, like a veil over the battlefield. Bodies lay scattered across the scorched earth. Mercenaries disarmed, disoriented. groaning in pain or bound at the wrists by quiet warriors. The rest had fled, retreating into the hills with their tails tucked behind million-dollar contracts and bleeding egos. But the ranch still stood, and the circle held. Sani lay on the couch inside the house, her side wrapped in linen. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "They came like fire," she whispered, "and we were the stone." Thatcher sat beside her, shirt torn, arms smeared with ash and blood. He looked like a man who'd walked through a furnace and come out the other side still standing. "You held the line," she said. He shook his head slowly. "We all did." Outside, Chief Greyhawk surveyed the aftermath. He walked among the wounded mercenaries, pausing over each one, offering no malice, only judgment. When he reached Thatcher at the porch, they locked eyes for a long moment. "No more doubts," the chief said. Thatcher nodded. "Not from me." Greyhawk turned toward the open field. "They'll return, with papers this time, with suits and pens and federal stamps." "Then we'll be waiting," Thatcher replied. "And we'll bring lawyers." The chief actually chuckled. "I'd rather face bullets." From the far hills, figures appeared on horseback, riders from other tribes. Word had spread quickly. What had started as a fringe warning, a dismissed prophecy, had now become legend. A small band had faced down a modern army and won. The other bands had come to bear witness. By nightfall, a great fire was lit again. But this time it wasn't a council of fear. It was a gathering of unity. Drums sounded like thunder through the valley. Children danced while warriors stood guard at the edge of the light. In the center, Sani sat propped on a blanket, the carved pendant around her neck now glowing faintly from the heat of the flames. She stood, slowly, painfully, and faced the gathered tribes. "When I fell," she began, "I thought the prophecy had failed, that I was the last of something broken." She looked at Thatcher across the circle. "But I was wrong. The storm did not break me. It delivered me, to exile, to the place of convergence, and through him, the circle was completed." A hush settled over the fire. Then Chief Greyhawk stepped forward, lifted her hand, and raised it high. "Let it be known across the basin, the land was tested, and it did not yield." From the edge of the crowd, Thatcher stepped back into the shadows, as he always did. But Sani caught his eye, and this time he didn't look away. He nodded once. She smiled, and the prophecy was fulfilled, not by magic, not by fire from the sky, but by people who refused to break, people who stood together. If you thought this was wild, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.